Hey YouTube, Morgan here, and welcome back to my kitchen. Today I'm going to be trying a vegetarian meal. I've only made this a couple of other times before, but it really blew us away with how similar it is to meatballs. This recipe is called Meatless Meatballs. They're made with mushrooms, and I'm not really a mushroom person, but because they're chopped so finely and mixed with other ingredients, you really can't tell, and the flavor was really fantastic last time. So I'm pretty excited to be giving this a try. I'm going to go ahead and get set up so we can get started. So thanks for joining me today. This recipe does require some fridge time, and the chopping of the vegetables takes a pretty good amount of time, so I'm starting pretty early today. I think I started around 2 p.m. or so, and the very first step that we want to take to get these meatless meatballs ready is to very finely mince the mushrooms. You want to get these as small as you can. See how small I'm getting those, and I've already chopped some in the bowl. These are going to mimic the ground meat in the recipe. If you want to use a food processor to process the vegetables instead of chopping, be very careful because you don't want these to turn into a paste. Next, we're going to finely dice some onion, and again, I don't want these chunks to be too big. I don't mind onion as much as I mind mushrooms, but I don't want anything super chunky that would make it very hard for the meatball to stick together, so I'm trying to get these as small as I can. Next on the list is to finely mince some garlic. Of course, it takes me forever to peel these. If you'd rather use a microplane, that's also a great option instead of trying to mince them with a knife. My skillet doesn't look great because the last thing I made was those biscuits and gravy, so I'm going to make sure I add plenty of oil before cooking these mushrooms, and I'm just going to saute these until I get most of the water cooked out of them. This part requires a little bit of patience, but it's well worth it because this really helps achieve not only a better flavor, but also a better texture, more consistent with what you'd expect from ground meat. Also, reducing the water content will help keep the meatballs sticking together properly. They won't kind of melt while they're cooking. Salting the mushrooms at this stage will help draw out more of that water content. The butter I just added will help with the flavor. Mushrooms don't have fat content, but meat does, so that's going to help there, and it's going to help us saute our onions, which I've just added to the pan. I don't really want a lot of browning on these onions, but I do want them to soften and cook down a little bit, make sure that they get translucent, but if they start to get a little charred, that's not really what I'm going for in this dish. I actually took the pan off the heat to add the garlic this time, and please don't mind the dirty stove. I know it needs to be cleaned. Now it's time to go ahead and get all of our ingredients mixed together so that we can make the base of the meatballs. I'm adding my mushroom and onion mixture to a large mixing bowl. Into that I'm adding some oats, some breadcrumbs, Parmesan cheese, a couple of eggs, and some parsley. Don't forget to salt and pepper. You really want to make sure you get these ingredients mixed well together. You don't want any clumps of oats in one area and then not in another, or same thing with Parmesan or really any of the ingredients. So I'm taking the time to go ahead and get everything mixed together in between each ingredient. Also, a lot of these are going to help soak up some of that extra moisture from the mushrooms that we try to cook out as much as possible, and then we're going to bind everything together using the eggs. It really probably wouldn't be too difficult to adapt this to a vegan recipe. I think the only two things that you'd have to change would be the eggs, which I just did some research, and you can apparently leave out the egg completely if you have the correct ratio of wet to dry ingredients. So I have recently made another meatball recipe where I grated the onion instead of chopping it, and that produced a lot of liquid, and I actually didn't use egg in that meatball recipe. So that might be something that you could try. And the other ingredient is Parmesan. There is a way to make your own vegan Parmesan if you don't want to buy that in the store. I think it's just hemp seeds, nutritional yeast, garlic powder, onion powder, and salt. In addition to the salt and pepper I added earlier, I'm also going to be adding a little bit of cayenne pepper for some kick and some oregano, but if you wanted to add other spices, now would be the perfect time to do that. Notice that I seasoned it in between the first and the second egg. That's what the instructions say to do, and I'm sure it's just to make sure that it's not too combined to properly mix the spices. Once we've got everything well combined, I'm just going to cover this with some plastic wrap and put it in the fridge for 2 to 3 hours. Alright, chilling time is done, so now it's time to form the meatballs. I did line my baking sheet with some parchment paper, or you could use a Silpat if you've got that, just to avoid any sticking on the bottom and to make sure that it doesn't get way too brown on the bottom. The recipe actually says that you should cook the meatballs in the sauce that we're going to be making soon, but I decided this time to try to bake them instead, just to kind of see how the flavor and texture would be different, and I really thought that this turned out well. For me, with the size that I made the meatballs, this made about 14 but I probably could have gotten a little bit more if I had made them the size of that first one. It's a little bit smaller, you can see, but it was plenty. We still had a serving worth of leftovers after my husband and I each had some for dinner, and after we get all of these rolled together, they're going to go into the oven at 450 degrees Fahrenheit for 12 to 15 minutes. While I was waiting on the meatballs to chill, I went ahead and got the sauce started, as well as started boiling some water for noodles. I did go ahead and add some of the sauce to the noodles once they were finished cooking, just for some extra coverage, and I'm going to top the meatballs again with more sauce. Notice that really nice browning color I got on the meatballs. I left them in for just a few extra minutes so that I could get that, but those look so amazing and they were really delicious. They had a nice little crust on the top, and I don't think you would have gotten that if you boiled them in the sauce. I'm pretty sure that's how I made them the first time, but I really liked the way they turned out when I baked them. After I've got the sauce topped on the meatballs, I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit more Parmesan cheese and the rest of that parsley I saved earlier for a garnish, and they turned out really beautiful and delicious. After giving these another try, I'm really curious to see if I could maybe make a meatloaf using this method with the mushrooms instead of ground meat, but I would highly recommend this recipe if you are trying to look for a more plant-based diet, either for health reasons or because of the rising grocery prices. This is a really great option, and I really encourage everyone to give this a try, even if you don't think that you like mushrooms. If you do end up trying it, I'd love to know how it works for you in the comments section, so let me know. If you like this video or you think somebody would benefit from this, please give me a thumbs up and feel free to share with others that you know. If you're new around here, don't forget to subscribe and you will see some future projects I've got coming out. That meatball recipe that I mentioned earlier, I've got in the works as well. Thanks for sticking around with me until the end, and I hope to see you next time. Bye guys!